This week, I'm joined by the author of multiple books. I think he's written about 4, but he's probably working on another one right now. But his most recent book, entitled Stop Living in Autopilot, Take Responsibility for Your Life and Rediscover a Bolder, Happier You, which was a bestseller in a few different categories. He's an internationally recognized speaker and success coach, a dynamic speaker at that. He's an award-winning broadcast journalist. He's been a host and producer with some of the top television networks such as BET, NBC, PBS, and a few others. He's the founder of Man Morning, which is a dynamic global community and weekly newsletter tailored for the growth-minded man who wants to upgrade his money, health, and relationships. The mission is to combat isolation and loneliness by fostering deep connections, community, and empowerment. He's a father, a husband, and someone who's trying to make an impact everywhere he goes. This week, my guest is Antonio Neves. I had a great conversation with Antonio filled with raw honesty, transparency, reflection, and a few laughs in between. Some of the things that we discuss in this episode, we talk about from walking on earning a scholarship to the University of Western Michigan. We talk about lessons he learned from his coach that sticks with him today, how his father's passing affected him, and how he got through those times. We talk about why men tend to put masks on with their emotions and why most men are hurting behind closed door. We talk about how he handles setbacks and pressure and why it's important to cultivate good habits. We talk about the importance of asking the right questions and so much more. There's a lot of great advice and transparency in this episode. Men specifically, this is an episode you do not want to miss. Sometimes you don't know what you need to hear until you hear it. But hey, before we go, do me a favor and leave a rating and review of the podcast and let us know what stuck out to you. And since you're watching this on YouTube, don't pass by this episode and not subscribe to the channel. So with all that being said, enjoy this week's episode with Antonio Neves. I'm looking forward to our conversation today, man. We're going to talk about a bunch of different things, but I want to be respectful of your time, man. And so I want to start. I like to start season 4 now, the same way, man. So I like to start with gratitude, man. So give me 3 things you're grateful for today, man.
Wow, that's a beautiful way to start this. I'm grateful for my health, man. I got so many people around me, and you read the news reports and all that about people who are struggling, and not just people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, but you're hearing about people in their 30s and their 40s having some real health complications right now. So I'm so helpful that I have my health, and I'll be able to go for a run after this and put it in some high intensity workout. That's one thing I'm thankful for. Number 2, I'm so thankful for my kids. My wife and I have 7-year-old twins, and kids allow you to see the world from a different vantage point. A key takeaway I have from my kids lately is that they ask directly for what they want.
That's what I'm talking about.
There is no hemming or hawing. Hey, is it possible? Dad, I want X. I want Y. I want Z. And so I have to remind myself of the universe to really to proclaim what I want, have a testimony kind of statement out there. So, and third, my wife. My wife is just amazing. She does so much for our family when I'm on the road traveling like crazy. She's super involved in the kids' school and all that they do. So those 3 things, the health, the kids, and an amazing and supportive spouse, as I'm sure you know, absolute game changer.
Man, that's beautiful, man. I've been thinking about, man, where do I want to start with Antonio today, man? And we have a few common areas, right? You graduated from Western Michigan, then Columbia, you got your master's, but you were a track and field athlete during your time, man, a walk-on that earned a scholarship. And I got a lot of respect for that as well, too, because again, like track and field is not one of those sports where you particularly think, I like to put it this way. Track and field, when it comes to running, is like every other sports is punishment. You know what I'm saying? You drop a pass in football, you got to run. You do something wrong in basketball, you got to run. But you were a jumper, man. So I know the knees and the joints were at one point extremely flexible, all right? But Talk to me a little bit about those collegiate years, like walking on and then competing in track and field. But probably more important, man, what did those times in track and field teach you about yourself?
Man, those collegiate years were something spectacular that changed my life. There are still lessons learned from those days at Western Michigan University in sexy Kalamazoo, Michigan, that I apply to my life today. And it's funny, man. Day one of practice, I had a moment after getting crushed in some workouts. I had this realization. I was like, oh, I'm not going to the Olympics. In Kalamazoo, Michigan, I had a moment as well. I was like, oh, your boy may not be an All-American, might not make it to
And
NCAA
I
championships.
get it.
But I also had this moment, I was like, and that doesn't discount that you can still have an exceptional experience as a student athlete while you're getting your education, while you compete in the Mid-American Conference. And I walked on that track and field team, and I went on to become an all-conference triple jumper and do well in the academics as well. The thing about being a walk-on, as a lot of people know, I'm sure your listeners, is that nothing's guaranteed. You can be cut from that roster at any moment. You're not on a scholarship, so every day, in many ways, is like a tryout, and you
Mm.
have to bring what I like to call that day one energy. I always like to invite people when they're thinking about if they're their job, and I say, think about that first day on the job, how fired up and how excited you were. How much of that day one energy are you still bringing today? I knew immediately after those 4 years on campus that I was going to be able to take advantage of knowing what it's like to perform in high stress situations, what it was to balance a ridiculous schedule, what it was to be part of a team, but also to your point, there's nobody you're passing to in track and field unless you're doing the 4x1 winning a medal. There's you're on your own in many ways. It's you against that lane, it's you against that sand. And there's just a special mindset I developed from that. And I carry that with me, that walk on mentality every single day, because you wake up thinking, hey, today could be the day I get cut. And I'm like, but not today, not with your boy.
Man, you talked about something that I think we all handle in different parts, right? Is that pressure. And everybody feels pressure at different moments, at different times. But the thing about track and field that I think people often overlook is like, yes, you have a team around you, but it's an individual thing unless you're on a relay. So your coach give you a last couple words, but when you go into that call room, you may be going with a teammate, but they're trying to dominate too. And I said all the time, like track and field, while it can be team oriented, it's a lonely sport. Like when you lose and you don't compete well, like you gotta you gotta walk down back, grab your bags on that long straight line. You gotta pick it up, and you have to sit with that. And one of the things that you've talked about often is relationships, particularly in men. But from a young man at that point, Antonio, pressure, right? That loneliness when it doesn't feel good, and when your back is against the wall, like, man, if I don't compete, scholarship could be like gone. So how did you navigate through those pressuring times and those lonely moments as well?
Well, those first few years, let's be clear, my first 2 years on that track and field team, I was doing absolutely horrible.
Mm.
And the reason why I knew I was doing absolutely horrible is because I had a coach that kept it real. He told me, he said one day, he said, Tony, you're doing absolutely horrible. Like he straight up told me, let me know that I wasn't
I like
doing
that. I
great.
can live with that. Mm-hmm.
In this day and age, I'm a firm believer that what we don't need another pat on the back. We need somebody to tell us the truth,
Mm.
to let us know how we are performing. That just doesn't seem to be happening nowadays. People get defensive, they get offended. But my coach, after 2 years of being on this team, told me the truth, said, you're not doing that great. But he did something in that moment, and that has really affected the life that I live today. He pointed out to two gentlemen on the track that day.
Yeah.
One was both were all Americans. One went on to compete in the Olympics, and one went on to compete in multiple world championships. But this is back in Kalamazoo, Michigan, before that type of success.
Yeah.
And he pointed to them and he said, in the 2 years that you've been on this team and the 2 years that you've been struggling, not once have I seen you spend any time with them,
Mm.
pointing to those All Americans. He
Mm.
said, instead, you're hanging out with those guys. And he pointed over to the high jump mat. The high jump mats, that's the club.
Hey, we chilling. He lays
Chilling,
back. We waiting last minute till we got a jog.
laying back, having a good time. Not bad people,
Not at all.
still great athletes, but not all Americans. And in that moment, Coach Shaw introduced me to something like this concept of allies and thieves.
Mm.
Thieves are those people that don't encourage you or inspire you or challenge you or push you or hold you accountable. Those guys on the high jump mat, but those all Americans, those allies, they expect something out of you. They expect you to show up and do what you're supposed to do the extra reps, etc. And that moment right there transformed my life. I was like, hey, am I going to spend time with these allies or spend time with these thieves? And as I mentioned to you, I never went on to the Olympics or the NCAA championships. I did become an all conference triple jumper, but I was able to earn a partial scholarship because of that time with them, that they made me better. And we've heard the saying, think about the 5 people you spend the most time with. And we do have to think about not just the 5 people we spend the most time with in person, but also right here on these phones, and ask yourself that simple question: do they make me better? That time in those 2 years on the team, it built up a grit in me. It built up a resilience in me. It built up a perseverance in me to get through tough times. You and I both know every day is not going to go our way. So I lean on that moment, that message of allies, but also that the being on that track by myself, knowing it's me against me right now. Let's see what we can do to achieve this PR, and building up that grit, that resilience, and perseverance.
And so you talked about your coach, man, keeping it real with you and sharing that advice with you that impacted you moving forward. Look, as a person who is what from 18 to 22, you're not always easily, you don't always want to hear certain things. You may hear it, but you're not really ready to receive it. Have you always been someone who was willing to take advice and to try and apply it? Or was it just like, hey, this guy's kind of dictating my scholarship anyway, I gotta listen? Were you
Yeah.
someone who kind of always was good at being open enough to being receptive to positive criticism?
I think by that stage of my life, I was, but to your point, he held the keys to a partial scholarship. At that time, my mom was paying for a portion of my tuition on her credit card. So I wanted to get better. But with coaching, as you know, Coach Shaw, RIP, he did something really unique in that moment. There are coaches, in my experience, this could be life coaches, business coach, or athletics coaches. There are some coaches that call you out.
Yeah.
As you know, in society nowadays, just go to social media. So many people love to call you out. But for me, what Coach Shaw did in that moment, even though if someone else heard it, they may have been kind of like, whoa, he got really aggressive with that 19-year-old. Coach Shaw didn't call me out in that moment. He called me up
Mm.
to be a better version of myself. And that's who I want around me in my life. I want those people who provide what I like to call good friction. It's like when your car is stuck in the snow and it's just spinning, but you can put some salt or sand or card paper or kitty litter underneath it, which it catches, and that creates friction to propel you forward.
Yeah.
And that's what Coach Shaw did for me in that moment. And I was open to it. My fear is nowadays a lot of people are unwilling or receptive to that good friction that can make you better. But pay close attention to those people who are around you, who are calling you up to be a better version of yourself. The last piece I'll add to that, and I'm sure you know this, you have to earn giving me advice, right? You have to earn giving me feedback. One thing I'm never going to talk to you about is how to run a corner in 100 in a relay. I'm not going to talk to you about no type of exchanges in the 4x1 or what it's like to run under 10.2 in the 100-meter dash. I can't do that, but I can talk to you about other things. So folks have to earn providing you with that feedback.
Man, that's beautifully said, man. I want to talk a little bit about the path that you're on now, Antonio, and I want to rip away a couple things, man. On paper, you're a speaker, author, journalist, so many great things, and you do it extremely well in many different forms. But when it comes down to me, man, like I'm a straight shooter. I don't, I'm not really a fluff type of guy, man. To me, you're a guy who speaks life. You're a guy who speaks encouragement, but you're a guy who is moving in purpose, right? How did this journey of purposefully sharing and giving and being a light in a world that can often seem dark, right? Because I think there are certain things that we have, always have a choice to do, but I also believe there's certain things that a person is called to do. So, how did this journey start for you? Because you said, I'm not going to the Olympics here, but the things you learned from track, you took it and now you applied it. So how did this start for you? Because not everybody wants to get on stage and open up parts of their story and their hearts.
Yeah, well, first, I appreciate you being direct. And it's just a great reminder to your point that the internet tells a story, but it can never tell the whole story of us and our path. In my experience, most great advice that we receive or that people share typically come from some type of pain. Most great advice comes from pain. So the guiding post for me in my life or things I write about in my book, Stop Living on Autopilot, and I talk about on stages, is I came from a unique upbringing. Between my mother and father were a total of 6 divorces.
Wow.
Before I graduated from high school and went to university, moved over 15 different times in my small hometown. I know what it's like to live in a shelter for battered and abused women and children. Now, I don't share that with you because woe is me, or I want
Yeah,
someone to feel
yeah,
sorry for me. That was just my origin. But somehow growing up, and I don't know why, I knew there had to be another way. I remember looking at men on the other side of town who were married and had kids, and they had these houses, and they had these houses with these things called garages that opened up and you could park a car in it. And they went on vacation a couple of times a year. And I was like, that's what success is. I remember just aiming for that. And I knew I had to go to university. And I had an older brother and older sister who chose not to take that path. And that was just transformative for me. At some point, I realized through mentors, through coaches, that people care about me, and no one can care more about my life than
Mm,
I do. I've always been reminded that no one owes me anything, but I owe myself absolutely everything. And that's something that has guided me not only in athletics, it's guided me in my career, it guides me now as a father and as a husband. And also, I've learned over the course of my life is that revealing, sometimes sharing those things that aren't pretty, that actually creates intimacy. Right?
yeah.
Those are the things that make people come close to you, that'll make you listen. When I'm on stage talking about years ago when I was dealing with a lot of stress and I developed a secret cigarette smoking habit, former collegiate athlete smoking cigarettes in alleys, trying to hide it with the bright green gardening gloves so my wife didn't smoke it.
Wow.
People relate to that. When you talk about certain types of challenges or things you've gone through, people are like, oh, he's not that different from me. And it draws people in. So my experiences growing up, I just always knew there had to be another way. And today I have so much joy of sharing my message with others. And one thing, I don't believe that I have all the answers by no means. If you pay attention to my work, which I appreciate you for doing your research and you do, at the end of the day, I'm a professional storyteller and question asker.
Mm,
What I do in my work is I ask questions. I believe that every man or woman out there has the answers to their most pressing challenges, but just maybe they haven't been asked the right question. And if part of my story and what I can share and the questions that I can ask can help them, I'm all for it. I'm an open book. And lastly, for that person listening right now, I want to remind them or watching that sometimes the thing that you are most ashamed of, the thing that you would be afraid to say out loud, that may be your superpower. That
yes.
thing that makes you unique, that thing that has got you to where you are today. So it's okay to shine some light on that, if you're comfortable doing so.
Man, thank you for sharing that, man. And I want to go here, in life, as you know, and all the listeners know, we will get hit, right? It's not a matter of whether it will happen, it will happen. I've heard you say in an interview before, like and you just spoke about it briefly. Your father was a big piece of your foundation. You had a lot of respect for him. And I'm sorry to hear about the loss that happened recently. I lost my grandmother, someone who was very dear and close to me, practically raised me last year. And it can be tough, right? Especially with any person, but men especially, right? Uh, I believe your father was diagnosed with dementia.
Yes.
Now, what were those times like for you, right? And I ask that in the sense of when we are felt with certain pains and certain discouragement and things that happen as men, we tend to isolate ourselves and pretend like, man, look, everything is good. Like that's pops, like that's friends, but like, I'm strong. I'll get through it on my own. But that's not always the case. And a lot of times we cry in silent and we kind of die in silent. So what were those times like for you, man? Because again, that's your father, but you're at a stage now where you kind of have to be open to those around you, to your wife, your spouse, your friends, to try to make them know that like this is how I can be helped. But was that the story for you, or was it something completely different?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. One of the biggest challenges for men right now, specifically in the United States and beyond, is that silence you're talking about, is that loneliness that you're talking about, is that disconnection where we pull away from people. Two of the most dangerous words that a man can say when you ask him how you're doing is, "I'm fine."
Mm,
How many times have you asked a buddy or a friend how you doing, or have you answered how you doing?
yeah,
I'm fine. And
yeah,
like most people, you got responsibilities, you got trips to take, you got business to do, you got kids to raise, wives, etc., dinner to cook. When my father passed after a long battle with dementia, I went into work mode. I'm good. Told everybody I'm good. I'm fine. I'll be all right. Hey, it happens. We knew it was going to happen eventually. All the outward stories, all the stuff just to deflect and not accept what was going on. That doesn't matter how long you know that someone's going to pass away. When it happens, it hits you. And I had this really powerful moment. One day, I was at home and the doorbell rang, and I was like, "Who's delivering a package this late?" And I went and opened the door, man, and I got this box and it was heavy. It was heavy box. I was like, "Oh, what's this?" And went to open it up. And this was a few weeks after my father passed away. And I opened it up, man, and it was my father's ashes from being cremated.
wow,
And that right there, you talk about the floodgates
yeah,
opening up, that moment when I couldn't deflect anymore, when I had to go to my wife, and even I get emotional talking about it right now, shared with her what was going on, like my dad's ash, like the person's here now that I'm holding a box of ashes. It was challenging, man. Healing as well. Tears can be so healing. So many men are emotionally constipated.
mm,
We have a backlog of emotions that we have not let out: fear, sadness, anger, and even joy. And listen, I've been in that category for many seasons over the course of my life. And that release, when that box of ashes showed up, was one that was necessary. I remember after my father died, somebody said something to me. They said, "Well, you're Mr. Neves now because my dad's no longer with us." And I was like, wow, that's heavy. What an honor, right? I'm Mr. Neves now. As long as I'm living, my dad, he's in me, right? He's literally in me with my DNA. As long
yeah,
as my kids are here, if they choose to have kids. But I just invite people, when you're going through a challenging time, it's easy to isolate. It's easy to hide. It's easy just to not pick up the phone and text people. But I invite people, as challenging as it is, to confront it, have those tough conversations, release what needs to be released. And I'm part of a men's community, and there's an international men's community that I founded called Man Morning, where if I didn't have that weekly men's community where I meet up, it would be a lot more challenging.
man. Thank you for sharing that, man. It instantly made me think about when my grandmother passed away. I lost a lot of people early in my life, and it hasn't been a good thing, but it's affected me in other ways, And when things happen to you consistently, it feels like the norm, and it doesn't mean it's a good thing, but you just get a little used to it. Not that it's a good way, right? But it made me think of when I saw my grandmother, man. She was in Jamaica. She was having early signs of dementia as well, too.
Mm-hmm.
And like they sent a picture of her in her casket.
Wow.
Beautiful white dress, beautiful white hat, but she was smiling. And I realized that like her dementia was starting to grow. But every time that she would hear my voice, she wouldn't forget me.
Wow.
She would forget a lot of things, but she wouldn't forget me. And that always stuck with me, where it's like, you know, even though people that we love, they may not be here, they're always here. And that's something that sticks with me to this day. Like I look at her picture all the time when I'm just like, when I'm praying and want to talk. You know what I'm saying? So that has helped me. But I want to ask you, Antonio, what was one thing that you remember from your dad that kind of sticks with you to this day?
One, thank you for sharing that story about your grandmother. Um, this is a story I'm gonna tell before my parents got divorced, and some people may not react positively to this, but had a powerful influence on me. When I was in grade school, again before my parents got divorced, I was bullied at school one day, and someone attempted to take my shoes, or they took my shoes. One of them, I don't know what the actual outcome was, because I was like in first grade or something like that. And I remember going home from school with my older brother, and my dad found out about the situation about my shoes and being bullied. And it was very interesting because he didn't get mad at me that I let somebody bully me, even though I was a kid. Interestingly, he got disappointed in my brother, who was 3 years older than me. And I
Mm,
will never forget this message he shared to my brother, like, don't ever let this happen to your brother again. This is family, and you take care of family. I don't care what happens, you take care of your brother. And my dad was always a family first kind
mm,
of dude. He preached the last name of Neves, like we're Nev strong. And even though there were ebbs and flows in our relationships over the years, he always had families back in many ways. And even though probably for a young kid, for my brother to hear that at that young age, having that responsibility to take care of his little brother,
yeah.
I'll never forget him instilling that message in, you take care of him.
Mm,
And I instill in my twins, they're the same age, but my little son, I'm like, yo, take care of your sister, make sure she's good, and say the same thing to her. But I'll never forget that moment.
wow, man. Antonio, you've spent a lot of time as a journalist writing, on screen for years, writing books, many books, and helping creating stories. What was the story that you were telling yourself back then versus the story that you're writing now versus the story you hope to write in the future?
Woo, you dropping bombs with these questions. Thank you. I think the best way to put it is this: based on my upbringing that I shared with you, I constantly sought out validation. I
Mm,
constantly sought out outward acceptance.
yeah,
Once you achieve this, once you do this, you've made it. You are worthy of something. And that was part of my academic path with education, degrees, moving to New York City, TV networks, all that kind of fun stuff. I think the best way we can put it is when you think about social media. And social media, as you know, a lot of people have those blue check marks for verification. And so at one point in my life, I really thought, even as a kid, before social media existed, that the mindset was you need that check mark for verification to show that you are valued.
yeah,
And then now I reached a place in life a few years ago where I realized that, and go with a metaphor with me. I know I'm going going wild with this. That no blue check mark can verify you. You were verified the day that you were born.
oh man, that's a
For the
mess.
longest time, I thought even before social media existed, I needed that check mark. I needed that validation. I needed them to say, yes, we pick you. You are of value. No blue check mark can verify you. We all were verified the day that we were born. And it took me quite a few years to get to that place. I spent 10 years in
Wow,
television seeking that validation of live TV, red lights, high stakes, high competition, etc.
wow.
And now today, as I think about the next chapter of that and what I want to instill in my kids, is that message of I am whole,
Mm,
I am loved, I,
wow.
I am of God, right? And really embracing that, knowing that I am enough. Does that stop me from putting in the work, putting in the effort, doing those daily activities? Absolutely not. But I have made a decision, man. I'm not letting anything out there, you know, affect how I feel here. When the legacy I care about is of my family, man, my
Mm,
spouse,
yeah.
of my kids, how they see their dad. We talk so much nowadays. I'm sorry, you got me going.
No, come on with it, man. Come on
We
with it.
talk so much about generational wealth with this whole, I want to create generational wealth for my family. And we talk about, of course, bank accounts and stocks and real estate. But, we can also create generational wealth with the memories that we
Yes,
leave
sir.
with our kids, that
Yes,
we
sir.
create with our kids, with our rituals, with the Sunday pancakes we have every single week, with Meatball Monday. There's a different kind of legacy that we can create that does not involve money. And that's a legacy that I'm trying to build right now. The internet will tell you I'm the author of multiple books and I speak on stages all across the world and an award winning journalist. But you know what? You know how I identify myself? And I'm going to ask you the same question afterwards. Yes, those things are true. And you know what? I'm Al and Zani's son. I'm Gigi's husband. I'm August and Harper's dad. That's how I identify. When I get back to that, that I really owe. August and Harper's dad is about to get on that stage in front of 5,000 people, best believe your boy's going to bring it. I have this sense of peace now. So I'm going to ask you, how would you introduce yourself to a stranger if you couldn't reference your career, professional achievements, or none of that stuff?
Man, easiest way I can put it, man. So like a couple of years back, I went back home to give a graduation speech at the high school that I went to, and so airports, you just never know how it's gonna play out. You may leave early, you may leave 8, and so I got there late, so I was kind of rushing. So I land back in Calgary, and I jump in the Uber, and I'm heading to the destination, and there was the the Uber driver, like he started asking me about like something he saw on like YouTube, right? And he was talking about this guy from the city of Calgary who ran track and field, who broke all the records. And he said, have you ever heard of him? I'm like, no, I actually have not. But the hindsight is he was talking about me.
Wow.
I am not someone who really falls in love with a title, right? I'm not someone who really cares about that stuff because at the end of the day, look, you got to put your pants on the way that I put my pants on. If we get cut, we bleed the same way. So I treat every single person the same, and I'm never someone who is. I don't want to be on a pedestal. I'm a person who, when I go into the room, unless I have to speak, man, you won't know I'm in the room. I'm in the back. I'm taking notes, the hoodie up. I'm chilling because I like to observe a lot more. I'm someone who I listen and then I speak. I
Mm.
don't need to be, I'm not a spotlight guy, but I believe when the purpose calls you out, you got to push past your fact that, oh, you don't want to speak on stage. Why?
Mm.
God has something greater in stores for you. So I think too many times, man, we fall in love with the title and we forget who we are. And we are human beings here to make the world better, not by what we do, but who we are behind closed doors. And I think that's the most important thing, man. Um,
Man. Just briefly, when you talk about
yeah,
you got the purpose for the calling, you made me think about it made me think about in long jump, and I write about this in my book, Stop Living on Autopilot. Every jumper knows this. There's a moment when you feel that wind at your back, that wind, and you're like, yo, I hope it's my turn to jump soon so I can catch
I
this
can catch.
wind. Same way, probably for sprinters. You want it to be legal, but you want that wind. And that's the purpose you're talking about. When the wind comes, we have to be willing to jump. We must be willing to go. And to your point, so many people, the wind hits their back and they ignore it. But that's your moment. You got to feel it. So I love what you said about the purpose.
Antonio, man, we're gonna have to do some type of part two or something here, man. I want to ask you this though. Vulnerability isn't easy, especially within men. I think women do a much better job of that, right? Women, they'll deal with their emotions, they'll get it out if they need to, they'll cry, they'll do whatever, but then they will start the process of healing and moving forward. We like to hold everything in a lot more. I'm not saying all of us do, but that's what typically we see in men. Vulnerability is tough. How does one person ask for help? Right? How does a man ask for help and not feel like their ego is getting in the way where they feel weak?
To your point, vulnerability, it's not an option. It's something that we must commit to. I think one of the best ways that we can get to a place where we can ask for help is one, to know that 9 times out of 10, people are willing to help you, and we must be willing to ask for that help. I found that the best way to get that consistent support is to meet with a group of guys on a consistent, regular basis. I'm part of a group of men, 7 men. We get together every Thursday here in Los Angeles, and it's called Man Morning. And we get together for an hour-long walk or a short hike.
Wow.
And we have a question or a theme that we talk about during that. But we also start, interestingly enough, with 2 questions. And the question is, what are you celebrating
Mm,
and what are you navigating?
mm,
And that just opens up something for men. And then what I find is that someone may share something about what they're navigating and they'll reveal something. And guess what? All of a sudden, that gives me permission to reveal as well. And I don't feel as tough or as tight about it. Again, revealing creates intimacy. So I invite people to find places to go where men show up to learn, where men show up to get better, where they show up to improve, and make sure it's one of those places where you can say 4 important words. See you next week. It
mm.
has to be consistent. It can't be the random text, a random meetup. It has to be consistent. And if people want to learn more about that, they can go to manmorning.com. But I've built trust with a group of guys over the course of a variety of years. And I know that I can share absolutely anything with them and they're not going to judge. Instead, they're going to love, they're going to encourage, they're going to ask good follow-up questions. They're going to, if they catch me slipping, they're going to call me up as opposed to calling me out. And I tell folks to ease into it. But your brothers, they want to help you. And one last thing, guess what? Sometimes the people you meet with on a weekly basis or you go to build with, they don't have to be your best friends. They don't have to be people you kick it with every single week outside of this venue. I think we always think our best friend or our homeboys have to be our everything. They don't. Let them be your homeboys. Let them be your best friend. Let your wife be your spouse. But there are intentional communities where you can go to share, to grow, and to learn. And I think listening to episodes like this is a great place to start.
Last question I have for you today, Antonio. I believe every season we're learning something, we're growing, but every season of our lives has a title. If this season of your life, Antonio, what would the title be? And give me a little context behind why.
Oh wow, the title of the season is coming to me. Is downloading right now. The title is something I referenced earlier. It's day one energy.
Mm.
It's getting back in the saddle. It's that vigor and it's that boldness. It's that the unknown right now. As I'm starting some new chapters in my life. Like I closed some previous chapters and some new things are open, and I'm just bringing that day one energy to push myself, to stretch myself, to do some uncomfortable things. When you reach a certain level of quote unquote success, it's easy to start coasting. It's easy to start rocking cruise
Yeah.
control. And I don't want to coast. I want to keep plugging ahead and I want to see what your boy has inside of him. And I want to be that great example for my kids. So I'm committing to that day one energy.
Tony, man, this has been great, man. Thank you so much, man. We gotta do a part two. As you're speaking, more questions come to mind. I'm just like, man. But before we go, my audience always hear from me when we close things out. But this season, I do things a little bit differently, man. I believe that there is a message inside all of us, depending on the particular day. We might be ready to share, we might not. But if you come on the show, we got to share that message, man. So what is the message that is on your heart today? And then what is the best way for people to support, to get to know more, and to follow the journey?
The message is no matter where you stand today, your story isn't over yet.
Oh, you
I
got to say
firmly,
that. You got to say that
yeah,
one again. Rewind
yeah.
that one back and say it again, man.
No matter where you stand today,
Mm,
I believe that your story isn't over yet.
wow.
I believe the best is ahead for you. You can start a new chapter whenever you want.
Wow.
And for folks that want to learn more, you can go to I invite people to check out manmorning.com. And everything social for me is the Antonio Neves. And what a joy to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much, man. Let's absolutely stay in touch. I'm looking forward to seeing what the new chapters have in stores, man. Thank you again for your time, man.
Thank you.